Right now, I'm pissed. My patient got evaluated by after ordering and reviewing a bunch of tests and lab work for my patient. They sent back a video summarizing their recommendations. My patient sent me that video to get my thoughts, and by the end of watching it, I was so mad I wanted to shake the screen. Watching their slick video, I was struck by the notion that the truth has a marketing problem. Here, in this video, I will clearly refute their nonsense, but I'm well aware that despite all my weeks of research, this video will never be as exciting or as interesting or as compelling or convincing as the sexy video from After all, sex sells, and while this video will be more true, it won't be as sexy, and unfortunately, that may not be enough.
I can't beat them. All I have on my side is facts and science, and people hate facts and science.
Hey, this is Dr. Zain from the future. You might be wondering why the influencer's name is bleeped out. When I first made this video, I was out for blood. I was ready to name names and throw down. I was guided by one of Nassim Taleb's principles. If you see fraud and you don't say fraud, you are a fraud. But my patient wasn't comfortable with naming the individual, creating bad blood, and all the fallout from that, which is pretty reasonable. His reaction and advice gave me a couple of insights. I realized that part of why I was angry was my sense that this was someone trying to take advantage of my patient. I felt defensive as a result and was acting out of that defensiveness, which never goes well. But most importantly, my patient showed me that I was actually doing less good in the world because by focusing so much on my disdain for this one particular influencer, it was distracting from my real message, which is teaching how to spot these fallacies and manipulation techniques. I got way too focused on pointing out this influencer's fallacies, but really, they all do it. It could have been any one of the major longevity influencers because they all make the same errors. They all use these same fallacies because the truth doesn't support their message, and they're in the business of telling their audience what they want to hear. So yes, you'll see that I'm irritated, because I was. But my hope is that you can look past that and that by using an AI voice, simulated video, and censoring out the name of the specific influencer, it'll be easier for you to focus on learning to spot the fallacies that he demonstrated. All the fallacies that add together to make the modern, data-driven health delusion that I call quantified quackery. And once you can spot those, level 1 of the River Rock mission will be complete. With that in mind, let's start at the beginning.
Welcome to the program. Great job getting all that data to us.
So I'm just going to pause here, barely 10 seconds in, and I'll admit that when I saw this, man, I was jealous. I am jealous. The graphics are so cool here, and when I saw this, I felt excited, just like I'm sure my patient did. But then, this happened.
So right away, the number one priority is to get you started on your supplements as fast as possible.
Wait a minute. Something has gone wrong. For someone whose background is in fitness and coaching, to present a graphic that indicates supplements are the number one priority for improving health is absolutely disingenuous and problematic. Most supplements don't work, and there's plenty of evidence for that. Most often, when double-blind placebo-controlled trials are finally done to test supplements, it turns out that they don't work any better than placebo. But this is complicated, specifically because the placebo effect is very real and very powerful, especially for subjective outcomes, including pain, mood, memory, and cognition. If the placebo effect were not so strong, then we would never need placebo-controlled randomized trials. But even though we know that the placebo effect exists, even though we may acknowledge intellectually that it is powerful, somehow we think it doesn't apply to us individually. We think that somehow we are so smart or intuitive or special that we will be able to tell the difference between a real effect and a placebo effect, just like most of us think we're better than average drivers, and just like doctors refuse to believe that they are influenced by getting free lunches from pharmaceutical reps. This combines with the sex sells concept because people also think, oh, no, I wasn't really influenced by the slick graphics. I just paid attention to the content. I'm too smart to be fooled by something like that. We're all individually too smart to be fooled, but somehow it's effective enough that companies pay millions for slick graphics and free lunches. I call this the placebo immunity illusion, thinking that we're too smart to be susceptible to placebo effects. Our culture encourages us to take pride in the idea of not being easily fooled, but in fact, deeper wisdom lies in the words of famous physicist Richard Feynman, who said, "The first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you're the easiest person to fool." Let's start with the clearest example of bullshit, homocysteine. I have an entire video on this, but let's hear what says.
Your homocysteine tested out at 12.3, which puts you at risk here in several ways. This study showed a cutoff of about 9 for the cardiovascular risk, so you're well above that, right here in black and white on your labs. Elevated homocysteine is also a risk factor for mortality and death overall, and it's a marker for inflammation, especially due to low B vitamins because those are what's called methyl donors for homocysteine. The nice thing is, we can bring this down easily by putting you on a supplement protocol of B12, folate, and B6.
I've discussed homocysteine before, but let's go through some details that he doesn't mention. First, the concern about elevated homocysteine levels started back in the 60s when a pathologist noticed it was a common factor in certain genetic conditions that cause premature heart disease in infants and children, as well as in the rare case of homozygous MTHFR genotypes. Then, in population studies, including epidemiological studies, as well as case control and cohort studies, we see significant associations with vascular disease, especially heart disease and dementia. Homocysteine levels and MTHFR status are excellent predictors of all-cause mortality, with a 33.6% increase in the risk of death for every 5 micromole per liter rise in homocysteine levels. We know that homocysteine levels also naturally rise with age. We know that they're higher in males and in postmenopausal women. We also know that things like alcohol, smoking, and obesity are also associated with higher levels of homocysteine, along with inflammatory conditions like rheumatoid arthritis, severe psoriasis, and severe infections, as well as some cancers. We know that in the lab, exposing blood vessel cells to homocysteine causes excessive thickening by more than 200% and increased secretion of inflammatory cytokines. Furthermore, we know that deficiencies in B vitamins can cause elevated levels, and in patients who have elevated homocysteine levels for any reason, including genetic causes like MTHFR, B vitamin supplementation can reduce homocysteine levels effectively by about 18 to 27%. Now, I'd imagine that all of that sounds pretty convincing. Bullshit usually does. I can spin the bullshit theory even better than if I try. But continuing the theme of Feynman quotes, it doesn't matter how beautiful your theory is, it doesn't matter how smart you are, if it doesn't agree with experiment, it's wrong. So now, let's look at the actual experiments. There have been 3 major double-blind RCTs of B vitamins and homocysteine: VISP, NORVIT, and HOPE-2. All of them showed exactly the same thing. First, elevated levels of homocysteine were in fact a marker of risk for cardiac events and death. Second, B vitamins compared to placebo did effectively reduce homocysteine levels. And third, those with reduced homocysteine levels had no reduction in cardiac risk or mortality. Their risk corresponded only to their original homocysteine level, not their reduced level. So reducing homocysteine levels did nothing compared to placebo for the outcomes, despite the reduction in homocysteine levels. But you might be thinking, wait, what does this mean? How does this make sense? If high homocysteine was associated with cardiovascular risk and the vitamins lowered homocysteine, why didn't it help? The most likely explanation is that there's some third unknown factor that is responsible for causing both elevated homocysteine and heart attacks. This means that they're strongly associated but not causal. So when you lower homocysteine levels, because it's not actually the cause, it does nothing for your heart disease risk. Sadly, every few years another knucklehead rolls out the same tired associations and the bullshit artistry starts again, even on topics that have already been disproven. This fallacy, thinking that changing a correlated biomarker risk factor will change the outcome, is just like thinking that adding a Ferrari hood ornament will speed up your car, based on the strong statistical correlation between Ferrari hood ornaments and fast cars. I call this the Biomarker Bamboozle fallacy. It's obvious when I talk about hood ornaments, but when dresses up the same poor reasoning and they say homocysteine or serum bicarbonate levels or biological age by epigenetic factors, then the razzle-dazzle tap-dancing bullshit disguises the same tired, flawed logic and people get fooled.
Razzle-dazzle them and they'll never catch flies.
Homocysteine is just one of the few things where we've actually done a placebo-controlled trial to test if adjusting the marker adjusts the risk. It doesn't, but it's become a classic example of how the health influencer bullshit can lead us astray. So this biomarker bamboozle is the biggest contributor to what I call quantified quackery. It's the meat of that particular bullshit sandwich. So to protect ourselves, remember, when someone says association, anytime you see a study with the words relationship or association or risk factor, you should be aware that these are observational studies and should not lead to a recommendation. Otherwise, it's a biomarker bamboozle. Now, I've used the term bullshit a few times as well. What do I actually mean by the term? Harry Frankfurt is a philosopher who actually wrote a book laying out a technical definition of the word bullshit, which is how I'm using it here. A liar is different from a bullshit artist because a liar knows the truth and cares enough about the truth to try to convince you of the opposite. A bullshit artist is something much worse. A bullshit artist will try to distract you from whether or not the truth even matters. This is the essence of con men and certain types of advertising and marketing. It's the Budweiser commercial with a girl in a bikini distracting you from whether or not the beer actually tastes good. It's the used car salesman talking about the low monthly payment, distracting you from the increase in the total cost of the car. And it's the health influencer distracting you with pretty graphics and social media clout from the flawed logic of his claims, selling you a hood ornament and claiming it's an engine upgrade. And this type of bullshit artistry is hard to fight because, after all, think about it. What kinds of things distract us? Beauty, confidence, simplicity, and excitement. Unfortunately, the truth is often ugly, unclear, depressing, complex, and boring. And as I said at the beginning, that's why the truth has a marketing problem. One of my favorite concepts is Brandolini's principle, also called the bullshit asymmetry principle, which states that it takes 10 times the amount of time, energy, effort, and experience to refute bullshit as it does to generate it. After all, this is why con artists have existed throughout history, because bullshit plays into our hopes and our fears, and it'll always catch our attention more than a boring, difficult, or depressing truth. You can see that in clickbait. This video is going to get way more clicks and attention than this one, even though the first one's bullshit and the second is simply fact. Bullshit artists use the excuse of new technologies all the time to play on our hopes that a revolution in our understanding is right around the corner that will save us from having to deal with difficult or painful truths, tap dancing with the illusion of scientism, and they generate an infinite audience wanting to hear more bullshit to distract them from hard truths.
Razzle dazzle them, and they'll beg you for more.
Let's call that the razzle-dazzle fallacy, which is just an especially dangerous application of the concept sex sells. Okay, so we've seen the flawed logic about homocysteine, but maybe he just got one thing wrong. Am I nitpicking, or was his bullshit pervasive? Well, as per Brandolini's principle, I can't go through every single example, but let's pick two more and I'll let you decide for yourself whether this seems like an honest mistake or a con. Before we launch into the next example, if you're enjoying this, please take a moment to support the channel by clicking the like and subscribe buttons below. The next example I'll take is the commentary on bicarbonate.
Here's a study showing that if you have a serum bicarbonate of less than 23, compared to those with a bicarbonate above 23, it is associated with lower speed and lower peak torque. So basically, no matter how you work the statistics, if your serum bicarbonate was less than 23, you were slower and weaker than those with higher bicarbonate. So your bicarbonate was below 23, so we can really craft a protocol for you here. We want to use things that are base loading, like magnesium and calcium and potassium, as well as green drink supplements, so we will add those supplements into our custom protocol for you.
Now, the first thing to remember is, again, we're talking about a relationship, like the relationship between hood ornaments and fast cars, or homocysteine and heart attacks. So the whole notion of recommending anything, including a supplement, is a biomarker bamboozle. But the errors go way, way deeper. Let's go through the study they cited. First, look at who was studied. The data was gathered from the N. Haynes group from 1999 to 2002. The study here is looking at the relationship between serum bicarbonate levels and walking speed and quadricep muscle strength. Now, first of all, why would you care about gait speed and quadricep strength? It's because both of those things are strongly correlated with longevity and health span. So remember, the reason we picked those two things is because we think there's a relationship to health and mortality. Walking faster or having stronger knee extension doesn't make you a better person. It's not going to get you into heaven or give you magic powers. It's not going to improve your mood or make you wealthy. We only care because of the effect on health and longevity. That'll be important later. Now, the abstract says that those with a bicarbonate level of less than 23, 22 and below, is associated with low gait speed and low peak torque. What they mean by peak torque here is quadriceps strength. But the first question that popped up in my mind is, well, why did they choose 23? If you look here at my patient's blood work, you'll see that, in fact, the normal range goes down to 20. So why did the study choose 23? Something that fail to understand is that different labs use different normal ranges because the machines that they use all function slightly differently. Those machines are calibrated according to strict criteria that apply only to that machine. So the same blood sample analyzed on different machines may give different numeric results. So to interpret this study, we need to know what machine they were using and what the normal range was for that machine. So if we scroll down, if you look, serum chemistry values were measured using the Hitachi 917 multi-channel analyzer. Very good. So go to the lovely little internet, we'll Google Hitachi 917 multi-channel analyzer, and what we'll get is this white paper with the CDC for the 917 analyzer. If we scroll all the way down, we'll find the normal values for bicarbonate right here. The normal range by this method is 22 to 29, and so choosing 22 and below is at the bottom of the range for this analyzer's normal. On this machine, a sodium of 21 would be abnormal. However, the machine that was used to analyze my patient's blood work was different, and the normal range went from 20 to 29, not from 22 to 29 as in the study. So my patient's bicarbonate of 21 was in the normal range. There is a reason why machines are calibrated differently. They are tested very carefully against standardized samples. That is why running a lab requires national CLIA certifications, because it is complex. These machines require very specific calibration, and each machine has to be used in the manner it is intended. The scientific reality of how blood work is done and how these machines work is something that these guys just clearly do not understand, or even have in their awareness. In their study, bicarbonate levels that were below the cutoff were abnormal for the machine that was being used. The numeric values cannot be simply directly compared between different machines. Let's go further into the study though, because even within the same study that they cite, the problems with their claims go even deeper. This study did the statistics two different ways, and one of them didn't show anything. First, they used a cutoff method, like what we've been talking about, comparing those above and below 23. But then they also did an analysis on what's called a continuous basis, meaning did people with a bicarbonate level of 24 have a slower speed than people with 25, and was 25 slower than 26, and so on? Or was it just a threshold effect of abnormal versus normal? And what they found is that it was a threshold effect. The authors themselves even say that right here. You can see in this table the continuous analysis showed no effect. When you're reading a study, pay attention to the part that's in parentheses here. That's what we call the confidence interval. If the bottom of the interval is below 1 and the top of the interval is above 1, it means that there is no statistically significant effect seen in this analysis. What this means in real terms is that if your bicarbonate level is so low that it's abnormal on the lab test machine being used, then that is correlated with slower gait speed and decreased quadriceps strength. But if it's normal, there's no significant difference between levels in the normal range. I mentioned before that the reason they chose gait speed and muscle strength was because those correlate very strongly with the risk of mortality. So wouldn't it be weird if someone had looked at this same data set and realized there was no correlation between bicarbonate levels and mortality in people that do not have other diseases? Well, in fact, someone did look at that. In this study, they looked at people who have low serum bicarbonate levels, below 22, but no kidney disease, and there was no indication of increased mortality. But what if we don't actually care about mortality? We just genuinely care about not walking fast and having weak quadriceps. The authors themselves state that additional studies would be needed to determine whether alkali treatment would improve gait speed and quadriceps strength. Once again, that study does exist, at least in people with kidney disease and low bicarbonate. This is the real type of evidence that we're after, right? A placebo-controlled randomized trial to see if correcting low bicarbonate levels improves physical function. Unfortunately, this study shows that supplementing with bicarbonate versus placebo had no impact. So here, in a real study, we see once again, just like homocysteine, the observational bullshit turned out to be nothing more than a biomarker bamboozle. And lastly, I'll say, you know what really improves walking speed and quadriceps strength? I'll give you a hint. It isn't bicarbonate. Now, later in the video, they briefly recommend leg strengthening, but there's a lot more emphasis on their supplement protocol. And to me, this is where it gets kind of shady. These guys don't recommend taking bicarbonate because recommending baking soda isn't sexy. No. He's designed a protocol because we need some razzle-dazzle fallacy, and protocol sounds sexy. And what is the protocol? It's not baking soda. No. They talk about base loading with potassium, calcium, and magnesium, none of which have any significant effects on pH, especially at the small doses involved here, as well as green drinks or whatever magic bullshit herbal powder capsule they're talking about. Aside from the fact that that's nonsense, even if it did work to raise bicarbonate levels, the whole thing is absurd because they're trying to improve a level that doesn't matter, that doesn't respond to treatment, that doesn't correlate to mortality or even dysfunction in people that are in the normal range or don't have kidney disease. Of course, it's still a biomarker bamboozle, but they're building onto it to get the full quantified quackery bullshit sandwich. On top of the razzle-dazzle fallacy, they've added in what I call the TLDR fallacy, also known as I'll just read the abstract. The actual study is too long and too complicated to read, so they couldn't be bothered. Certainly our culture has a preference for what's easy, but sometimes the truth is complex and difficult. Okay, let's go through one more example. Here's what they have to say about my patient's potassium level.
Okay, let's talk about your potassium. Here's the study showing that even in people with normal potassium levels, those who had higher potassium levels were associated with higher risk of cardiovascular mortality. And they defined high potassium in this study as 4.5 to 5.4, and your potassium was right at 4.5.
This is the study they cited. And again, if you only read the abstract, the TLDR fallacy, then the claim is that those with a potassium level of 4.5 to 5.4 had a higher risk of death than those with a normal or low potassium level. Now, I do want to pause and think about this just for a second. The idea that we can measure a person's potassium level once, a snapshot at a particular time, and then we'll be able to predict that person's risk of death nearly 20 years later, ignoring anything that's happened to that person in between, changes in diet, health, medications, diseases, etc. That one potassium level is going to meaningfully predict their risk. Now seriously, what's more likely? Is this association a statistical accident, or is this actually a real risk factor? Common sense here would give you a low pretest probability. But anyway, let's pretend we should take this seriously. This study is looking at even older data than the bicarbonate study. This was NHANES 1. Digging into the CDC website, I was able to find out that the machine they used for testing was the Instrumentation Lab Digitized Flame Photometer Model 143. Flame photometry is a super old method. I have the details in another video, but basically you dilute the serum in water and then spray it into a flame, and you measure the color that it burns. Potassium burns purple, and the brightness of the purple color indicates how much potassium is in the serum. That is not at all how we measure potassium today, which uses indirect or direct ion selective electrodes. It's so old that I was only able to find a general range of normal for the method, not specific to that machine, which was from 3.5 to 5.0. Now that's important because in this study, the high potassium group included people with potassium from 4.5 to 5.4, meaning they included both normal and abnormally high levels all together in one group. And as we saw in the bicarbonate example, that threshold effect can be quite important, and you can get skewed results by including both normal and abnormal levels in the same group. But the real story in this article is revealed when you read the discussion section. Again, only if you actually read the whole article, which they clearly did not. The authors note, and I quote, "Increased serum potassium was not a risk marker in non-diuretic users or those with normal renal function. Of course, my patient is not on diuretics, he has normal renal function, and thus, in the very study that they cited, he would not be at increased risk." This is due to a failure to actually read and understand the study that they are citing does not apply to this patient, even according to the authors of that study. There are also other studies on this topic. This study, by contrast, found increased mortality from low potassium, but not high potassium. And so did this one, finding that potassium levels from 3.5 to 3.9 had an increased risk, but no increased risk from 4.5 to 4.9, and then an increased risk again in those who are above 5.0. Now, this study, on the other hand, found no association between any potassium levels and cardiovascular disease or cardiovascular disease-related deaths. With all these conflicting results, couldn't we just pool together all the results and do a meta-analysis? Well, that's been done as well, and it showed on the combined data from 29 different studies a U-shaped curve where both low and high potassium levels were associated with increased mortality, with the minimal risk at a level of 4.2. My patient's level of 4.5 is minimally different from that. Now, there's one more study that I think deserves to be mentioned, which is this 2017 study that looks specifically at the impact of potassium levels on the risk of death in patients that had no major health diagnoses versus those with chronic diseases. This was a very different study than the others. Here, the normal population death rate is shown in gray, compared to patients who have various medical conditions shown in orange. You can see that there is essentially no association in the normal range between potassium levels and the risk of death in healthy people, only in those with medical conditions, especially medical conditions like heart failure and kidney disease, where both the disease and the medications for the disease can often affect potassium levels, like diuretics, angiotensin agents, and aldosterone blocking agents. Now, as I've said, these are all observational studies and no claims should really be made from them at all, but even by the rules of their own bullshit game, they have cherry-picked a study even when there are better, more recent studies and even a meta-analysis on the same topic. That, to me, is frankly concerning. But back to my patient. In no circumstance, even within the exact study that they cited, is he in the high-risk group. Their claim isn't even aligned with their own cited study. My patient, who has no overt diseases, nor does he take diuretics, under no circumstance is he at any increased risk associated with his potassium levels in the normal range. So is ignoring better, more recent studies, and they failed to even fully read, understand, and apply their own chosen study correctly, and they are ignoring once again that observational studies cannot yield reliable recommendations. But nonetheless, they're going to go right ahead and make recommendations. And what is their recommendation? Take our supplements, buy our program. We'll come up with any story we can just so you buy our bullshit, because if you buy this bullshit, you're more likely to buy more bullshit from us in the future. We've learned from homocysteine and bicarbonate to watch out for the biomarker bamboozle, remembering that improving a marker does not always improve the outcome. But this is the next level, because they don't even have a trial showing that their recommended supplement stack improves the marker, let alone the outcome. I have to admit, when I see this level of bullshit, I have one more concern that pops up. I mentioned before that there are several studies showing a risk from low normal potassium levels and several showing risk from high normal potassium levels. Is just showing one study to people with low normal levels and then showing people with high normal levels the other studies, so they can show everyone a study to get them concerned and to convince them that their supplement protocol is needed? I have no way of knowing, but it's very odd to cite a single old study instead of more recent, more complete meta-analyses or the modern studies showing the U-shaped association. In today's day and age, anyone can just say, a study says, and then make any claim they want. If they actually bother to cite or show the study, that's considered above and beyond. But that isn't good enough, especially if you're going to make recommendations about someone's health. Reading and interpreting studies is a skill and requires careful attention. Studies don't exist in isolation. There's a corpus of scholarship on each topic, and not every study is as good as another. I call this the any study will do fallacy. Has his PhD, he should know better than this. Observational studies in fitness, just like in blood work, are never as good as controlled trials, and biochemical mechanisms often fail to translate into meaningful outcomes. And here's the thing, I've picked on these three examples, but this type of flawed reasoning and flawed understanding was rampant throughout the video. I could have picked on their comments about resting heart rate or stool analysis or cortisol, A1C, or literally anything except stress management, sleep, losing weight, VO2 max, and leg strength, all of which I've told my patient before. I could use any of those as examples because the fallacies are all the same, all building up the edifice of quantified quackery. The real problem with the wellness influencer set is that they are ignorant of their ignorance. They attempt to interpret these lab values in what they think is a more advanced fashion and end up, as a result of their own ignorance, falling prey to the Dunning-Kruger effect and massively misinterpreting the lab values due to a lack of context, a lack of awareness, and an inability to read beyond the abstract. And of course, he starts the video by saying, "I'm not a medical professional," but then goes on to give basically medical advice and recommendations, and certainly recommends buying those supplements for which there is no evidence and no placebo-controlled randomized trial on outcomes. Certainly sounds like he's interpreting blood work and giving a prescription, doesn't it? Now, it's not a pharmaceutical prescription, it's an herbal prescription, but in my mind, if that's not practicing medicine without a license, I don't know what is. And hopefully I've made a case here for why that's not a terribly good idea. Now, do I think these supplements are harmful? I don't know. At best, they're just placebo, and as I mentioned before, the placebo effect can be powerful, especially if it's presented with confidence and has a high cost. Additionally, as I mentioned before, they also recommended that my patient improve his sleep and reduce his stress and improve his VO2 max and leg strength, and those things will benefit the patient. It's a lot like me saying, oh, you have pneumonia, take these antibiotics. Oh, and by the way, let me sell you several $100 worth of herbs for your immunity. Well, of course you'll feel better, but the antibiotics are the only active part of my recommendation. So the combination of a few truly effective but basic recommendations have been gussied up with a lot of bullshit and presented with slick graphics to make sure the razzle-dazzle fallacy has its full effect. And when the patient does feel better from the combination of the basic recommendations plus placebo effect, they'll keep taking those supplements and buy more programs, not realizing that the supplements had nothing to do with their improvement beyond their placebo effect. I call this using a pinch of truth to season a pot of bullshit. And you can see how all these fallacies play together in this video. You start with some razzle-dazzle fallacy, the patient brings their own placebo immunity illusion fallacy, you add in a scoop of biomarker bamboozle and plenty of TLDR fallacy and any study will do fallacy, and finally put in just a pinch of truth to season the pot of bullshit, and you've got a great recipe for a killer business model based on quantified quackery. Maybe it's not intentional and it's just due to a massive amount of ignorance, but even in that case, as Anna Sewell wrote in Black Beauty, how can you talk about only ignorance? Don't you know that it is the worst thing in the world next to wickedness, and which does the most mischief, heaven only knows. If people can say, oh, I did not know, I did not mean any harm, they think it is all right. If you want to learn more about other quantified quackery bullshit artists, check out this video where I debunk the predatory full-body MRI scam. Thank you for your time.